Welcome to 365 Motivationals, your go-to channel for daily inspiration, personal growth, and success strategies. Here we dive deep into the teachings of the greatest minds in self-help, personal development, and success literature to empower you on your journey to becoming the best version of yourself. If you're passionate about improving your mindset, achieving your goals, and living a fulfilling life, you're in the right place. Don't forget to like this video to help others find it more easily. Leave a comment to share your thoughts or questions, and if you haven't already, make sure to subscribe to the channel for more motivational content that will keep you inspired every single day. Summary of The Inner Consciousness by William Walker Atkinson. The Inner Consciousness by William Walker Atkinson is a profound exploration of the deeper levels of the mind, where true power and understanding reside. Atkinson focuses on the idea that within each of us lies an untapped reservoir of potential, often referred to as the subconscious or inner consciousness. This book serves as a guide to unlocking that hidden power and using it to transform your life. 1. Understanding the inner consciousness. At the heart of Atkinson's work is the belief that the inner consciousness is vastly more powerful than we often realize. It is the part of us that controls our habits, instincts, intuition, and much of our daily functioning. Unlike the conscious mind, which is limited to the thoughts and perceptions of the present moment, the inner consciousness is like a vast ocean of memory, intuition, and potential. Atkinson argues that by becoming more aware of this part of ourselves, we can access greater levels of mental and emotional control. The key is to understand how the conscious mind interacts with the subconscious and how we can direct this interaction to our advantage. 2. The power of suggestion and autosuggestion. One of the most powerful tools for influencing the inner consciousness is autosuggestion. Atkinson explains that the thoughts we habitually think and the beliefs we consistently hold are fed directly into our subconscious mind, shaping our reality. Whether we realize it or not, we are constantly suggesting things to ourselves, both positive and negative. Atkinson emphasizes the importance of taking control of this process through positive autosuggestion. By consciously choosing to think thoughts of success, happiness, and abundance, we program our subconscious to create these outcomes in our lives. The subconscious mind does not distinguish between good or bad suggestions. It simply acts on whatever it is fed. Atkinson provides practical techniques for developing the habit of positive autosuggestion, including the use of affirmations, visualization, and mental focus. Over time, these practices help to reprogram the subconscious mind to work in alignment with our conscious goals and desires. 3. Developing mental mastery. Atkinson also emphasizes the importance of mental discipline in mastering the inner consciousness. He encourages readers to cultivate a calm, focused mind that can direct thoughts and energies toward positive outcomes. One of the key aspects of mental mastery is the ability to control one's emotions and reactions, which are often triggered by unconscious beliefs and patterns. Through practices such as meditation and mental concentration, Atkinson teaches how to calm the conscious mind and gain access to the deeper layers of the inner consciousness. By learning to quiet the mind, we can hear the inner voice of intuition and wisdom, which often provides insights and solutions that the conscious mind cannot grasp. Atkinson also highlights the importance of keeping the mind free from negative influences. He warns against the dangers of allowing fear, doubt, or pessimism to dominate our thinking, as these negative states can sabotage our efforts to create a positive life. Instead, he advocates for maintaining a positive, hopeful mindset, which will attract positive outcomes through the law of attraction. 4. The role of intuition. A major theme in the inner consciousness is the role of intuition. Atkinson explains that the inner consciousness is the seat of intuitive knowledge, which is often faster and more accurate than rational thinking. He describes intuition as a direct connection to universal wisdom, which can guide us in making decisions, solving problems, and navigating life. Atkinson encourages readers to cultivate their intuition by trusting their inner feelings and instincts rather than relying solely on logical reasoning. He explains that while the conscious mind tends to analyze and dissect information, the inner consciousness processes information holistically, and often reaches conclusions more quickly and accurately. By developing a stronger connection to our intuition, Atkinson argues, we can make wiser decisions and live a more harmonious and successful life. 5. Using the inner consciousness for success. Finally, Atkinson explores how to use the power of the inner consciousness to achieve success in all areas of life. He explains that the subconscious mind is constantly working behind the scenes to manifest our deepest desires and beliefs. Therefore, by aligning our conscious desires with the programming of the subconscious, we can create the conditions for success. Atkinson provides practical advice for setting goals, visualizing success, and taking action in alignment with our inner consciousness. He stresses that success is not just about working harder on the outside, but also about cultivating the right mindset and inner state. When we harmonize our thoughts, feelings, and actions with our goals, success becomes a natural outcome.
The Inner Consciousness, a course of lessons on the inner planes of the mind, intuition, instinct, automatic mentation, and other wonderful phases of mental phenomena by William Walker Atkinson. Lesson 1. Inner Consciousness. It was formerly taught in the schools that all of the mind of an individual was comprised within the limits of ordinary consciousness, but for many years this old idea has been gradually superseded by more advanced conceptions. Leibniz was one of the first to advance the newer idea and to promulgate the doctrine that there were mental energies and activities manifesting on a plane of mind outside of the field of ordinary consciousness. From his time, psychologists have taught, more and more forcibly, that much of our mental work is performed outside of the ordinary field of consciousness. And at the present time, the idea of an inner consciousness is generally accepted among psychologists. Luz says, the teaching of most modern psychologists is that consciousness forms but a small item in the total of physical processes. Unconscious sensations, ideas, and judgments are made to play a great part in their explanations. It is very certain that in every conscious volition, every act that is so characterized, the larger part of it is quite unconscious. It is equally certain that in every perception, there are unconscious processes of reproduction and inference. There is a middle distance of subconsciousness and a background of unconsciousness. And Sir William Hamilton states, I do not hesitate to affirm that what we are conscious of is constructed out of what we are not conscious of, that our whole knowledge, in fact, is made up of the unknown and incognizable. The sphere of our consciousness is only a small circle in the center of a far wider sphere of action and passion, of which we are only conscious through its effects. And Taine has said in connection with the same thought, mental events imperceptible to consciousness are far more numerous than the others, and of the world which makes up our being, we only perceive the highest points, the lighted-up peaks of a continent whose lower levels remain in the shade. Beneath ordinary sensations are their components, that is to say, the elementary sensations, which must be combined into groups to reach our consciousness. Outside a little luminous circle lies a great large ring of twilight, and beyond this an indefinite night, but the events of this twilight and this night are as real as those within the luminous circle. To this, Maudsley adds his testimony as follows. Examine closely and without bias the ordinary mental operations of life, and you will surely discover that consciousness has not 1/10 part of the function therein which it is commonly assumed to have. In every conscious state, there are at work conscious, subconscious, and infraconscious energies, the last as indispensable as the first. It is now known that inner conscious ideas, impressions, and thoughts play a most important part in the thought world of every individual. Beyond every outer conscious action, there may be found a vast inner conscious background. It is held that of our entire mental processes, less than 10% are performed in the field of outer consciousness. As a well-known writer has so well expressed it, our self is greater than we know. It has peaks above and lowlands below the plateau of our conscious experience. Professor Elmer Gates has forcibly put it, at least 90% of our mental life is subconscious. If you will analyze your mental operations, you will find that conscious thinking is never a continuous line of consciousness, but a series of conscious data with great intervals of subconsciousness. We sit and try to solve a problem and fail. We walk around, try again, and fail. Suddenly, an idea dawns that leads to a solution of the problem. The subconscious processes were at work. We do not volitionally create our own thinking. It takes place in us. We are more or less passive recipients. We cannot change the nature of a thought or of a truth, but we can, as it were, guide the ship by a moving of the helm. But perhaps the most beautiful expression of this underlying truth is that of Sir Oliver Lodge, who says in his consideration of the subject, "Imagine an iceberg glorying in its crisp solidity and sparkling pinnacles, resenting attention paid to its submerged self or supporting region, or to the saline liquid out of which it arose, and into which in due course it will some day return." Or, reversing the metaphor, we may liken our present state to that of the hull of a ship submerged in a dim ocean among strange monsters, propelled in a blind manner through space. Proud, perhaps, of accumulating many barnacles of decoration, only recognizing our destination by bumping against the dock wall, and with no cognizance of the deck and cabins above, or the spars and sails, no thought of the sextant and the compass and the captain, no perception of the lookout on the mast, of the distant horizon. With no vision of objects far ahead, dangers to be avoided, destinations to be reached, other ships to be spoken to by means other than by bodily contact, a region of sunshine and cloud, of space or perception, and of intelligence utterly inaccessible below the waterline. Dr. Schofield has cleverly and beautifully illustrated the idea in the following words. Our conscious mind, as compared with the unconscious mind, has been likened to the visible spectrum of the sun's rays, as compared to the invisible part which stretches indefinitely on either side. We know now that the chief part of heat comes from the ultra-red rays that show no light, and the main part of the chemical changes in the vegetable world are the results of the ultraviolet rays at the other end of the spectrum, which are equally invisible to the eye and are recognized only by their potent effects. Indeed, as these invisible rays extend indefinitely on both sides of the visible spectrum, so we may say that the mind includes not only the visible or conscious part, and what we have termed the subconscious, that which lies below the red line, but also the superconscious mind that lies at the other end. All those regions of higher soul and spirit life, of which we are only at times vaguely conscious, but which always exist and link us onto eternal verities, on the one side, as surely as the subconscious mind links us to the body on the other. The late Frederick W. H. Myers, after years of careful study and research along the lines of the out-of-consciousness states, formulated a hypothesis of a secondary self, or as he called it, a subliminal self, which self he held possessed certain powers which it exercised in a measure independent of the ordinary conscious self. Perhaps the best explanation of his hypothesis has been stated by Mr. Myers himself in his book entitled Human Personality, in which he states, "The idea of a threshold of consciousness, of a level above which sensation or thought must rise before it can enter into our conscious life, is a simple and familiar one. The word subliminal, meaning beneath the threshold, has already been used to define those sensations which are too feeble to be individually recognized. I propose to extend the meaning of the term so as to make it cover all that takes place beneath the ordinary threshold, or say, if preferred, the ordinary margin of consciousness, not only those faint stimulations whose very faintness must keep them submerged, but much else which psychology as yet scarcely recognizes. Sensations, thoughts, emotions, which may be strong, definite, and independent, but which, by the original constitution of our being, seldom merge into that superliminal current of consciousness which we habitually identify with ourselves. Perceiving that these submerged thoughts and emotions possess the characteristics which we associate with conscious life, I feel bound to speak of a subliminal or ultramarginal consciousness. A consciousness which we shall see, for instance, uttering or writing sentences quite as complex and coherent as the supraliminal consciousness could make them. Perceiving further that this conscious life beneath the threshold or beyond the margin seems to be no discontinuous or intermittent thing, that not only are these isolated subliminal processes comparable with isolated supraliminal processes, as when a problem is solved by some unknown procedure in a dream, but that there also is a continuous subliminal chain of memory, or more chains than one, involving just that kind of individual and persistent revival of old impressions and response to new ones, which we commonly call a self. I find it permissible to speak of subliminal selves, or more briefly, a subliminal self. I do not indeed, by using this term, assume that there are two correlative and parallel selves existing always within each of us. Rather, I mean by the subliminal self that part of the self which is commonly subliminal, and I conceive that there may be not only many cooperations between these quasi-independent trains of thought, but also upheavals and alternations of personality of many kinds, so that what was once below the surface may for a time or permanently rise above it. And I conceive also that no self of which we can here have cognizance is in reality more than a fragment of a larger self, revealed in a fashion at once shifting and limited through an organism not so framed as to afford it full manifestation. We have given you the different views of these respective authorities, not that we purpose adopting exclusively any of the various theories or hypotheses advanced, but merely that you may see that this question of an inner consciousness is not a mere vague theory of certain mystics and metaphysicians, but on the contrary is one that has attracted the earnest attention and consideration of scientific men and careful investigators along psychological lines. We shall have but very little to do with theories in this book. The facts of the subject concern us more earnestly. Lesson 2. The Planes of Consciousness. We have seen in the preceding chapter that many leading minds have recognized the existence and phenomena of certain planes of consciousness lying outside of, below, or above the ordinary plane or field of ordinary consciousness. Brushing aside as unimportant the various names and terms that have been applied to these planes or fields of inner consciousness, we easily find a common ground of agreement between all of the authorities. It is true that the subject has become somewhat clouded by the insistence of certain details of theory on the part of the several investigators, but they all practically agree upon the fundamental and basic facts and phenomena, and it is upon these basic and fundamental facts and phenomena that we shall rest our case as presented in this little book. The student of psychology has heard much during the past decade regarding the many theories, some of them quite fantastic, designed to account for and explain the phenomena which science finds to exist and which it has classified as belonging to the inner conscious plane of mental activity. Some of the theories advanced to account for the known facts and observed phenomena have attracted to their support many followers, the respective schools holding animated and sometimes fierce contest regarding the validity and superior qualities of their respective schools and their founders. But with these theories, and the schools which have been built up upon them, this work will have little to do or say. Enough for us is the fact of the existence of the phenomena, and the fact that there is certainly in manifestation an area of mental activity, which for reasons that we shall state we have called the inner consciousness. Recognizing the fact of the phenomena and accepting it as proven truth, we shall proceed to consider its manifestations and apparent laws, and also the methods whereby one may use this mental activity to advantage. But we shall leave the theories to the theorists, and the discussions regarding the same to those who are fond of such exercises of the mind. For ourselves, we are tired of such things, and prefer to deal with observed facts and the how to get results part of the question. We are apt to regard as a truth the observation of the writer who said, "Theories are but mighty soap bubbles with which the grown-up children of science amuse themselves." And we also view with favor the lines of the poet in which he says, "The nearer to the practical men keep, the less they deal in vague and abstract things, the less they deal in huge, mysterious words, the mightier is their power." The simple peasant who observes a truth and from the fact deduces principle adds solid treasure to the public wealth. The theorist who dreams a rainbow dream and calls hypothesis philosophy at best is but a paper financier who palms his specious promises for gold. Facts are the basis of philosophy, philosophy the harmony of facts, seen in their right relation. As a matter of fact, in order to account for the phenomena of the inner consciousness, It is not necessary to believe in or assume the hypothesis of any kind of a dual mind at all. One mind may contain within itself sufficient to account for the facts without postulating a two-mind theory. One mind may contain within itself two, or many more than two, planes or fields of activity or consciousness, upon which and in which the varied mental phenomena may be manifested. In order to understand the phenomena of the inner consciousness, all that it is necessary for us to do is to start with the idea that in the mind of every person there are areas, fields, or planes of mental activity above and below the field, area, or plane that we know as the outer consciousness. In other words, to assume, 1, that there are basements or cellars, vaults and subvaults of mind below the level of the mental first floor in which we consider the results of our mental processes. And 2, is this true that also there are several mental stories above as well as below the one on which we do our considering? And it is with these several stories of mind, these planes or areas of mental activity, that we shall now have to do in this work. As we have seen from the authorities quoted, the fields or areas of mind, outside of the circle of the outer consciousness, are many and varied. Careful investigators have divided the mental activities of these several planes or areas into two general classes, namely 1, those below the plane of outer consciousness and which have the nature of automatic action, and 2, those above the plane of outer consciousness and which have the nature of intuitive action, etc. Some investigators have given to these two general planes or fields of mentation the names of the subconscious and the superconscious, respectively, the term sub meaning under, beneath, etc., and the term super meaning above, over, etc. The trouble with this classification is that it places the conscious mind, or that portion of our mentality, the actions of which we may call the outer, in the center of a scale, the extremes of which represent the higher and lower phases of inner mentation, respectively. This is not correct, for the so-called conscious mind is merely a field of observation, before which passes the results of mental activity on the other planes, which when evolved pass into the field of consciousness, just as a star passes into the field of observation of a telescope, or a tiny object into the field of observation of the microscope, and is then perceived by the watching organ of vision. These objects passing into the field of observation of the outer consciousness may come from the higher or lower planes of the inner mind. In fact, the best observers know there can be no hard and fast line drawn between the activities and manifestations of the two respective groups of planes known as the subconscious and superconscious minds. These activities shade into each other and are like the degrees on a scale, which are merely symbols which record the comparative and relative stages of manifestation of a thing, but which do not divide the thing into absolute divisions or classes. In fact, the very best occult authorities inform us that there are very many degrees or planes of mental activity, higher and lower, outside of the field of observation of the outer consciousness. On the lower planes of consciousness are to be found the consciousness of the various cells and cell groups in our bodies, which constitute the organ minds which occultists know to exist. Then there are many planes of mentation concerned with directing the bodily activities. Then there are many planes of thought below the ordinary field of outer consciousness, and many planes of awareness and knowing above that of the ordinary intellectual operations of the average mind. These planes are merely the many degrees in the grand scale of mind. We shall learn something of certain of them as we proceed with these lessons. Following the illustration of the upper and lower stories, basements, cellars, subcellars, etc., we may say that it will help the student to think of the ordinary field of observation, known as the outer consciousness of the everyday mind, as akin to the main floor of a warehouse, on which is received merchandise arriving from the outside business world, and on which are started, packed, and expressed the various goods, wares, and merchandise reaching that department from the upper stories, basement, cellars, and other storehouses of the mental warehouse and place of business in pursuance to orders from the office. The outer consciousness, or field of observation and consideration, is not a separate mind, as some claim, or the real mind, as the masses of people consider it, but instead is merely a department of the whole mental business, in which the goods, stored articles, and manufactured goods from the other departments and workshops are sorted, selected, packed, and expressed to the outer world. If you will fix this illustration in your mind, you will be able to easily assimilate and consider the facts to which we shall call your attention in the following lessons. And now, you see why we have adopted the term the inner consciousness as applicable to both the higher and lower planes of the extra-conscious mental activities. The term inner means further in, interior, internal, not outer, etc. The word consciousness is one difficult to correctly define. In a general sense, it means mental awareness, but we have adhered to the closer meaning of the term, which is used in the sense of awareness of mental action and energy, or the quality by which mind in activity is aware of its own activities. There can be no mental activity without consciousness on some plane, and the use of the word unconscious in connection with mental activity is an absurdity. There is consciousness, in some degree and on some plane, in everything, from the atom, an electron, to the highest manifestation of superhuman mind. And that which we call our outer consciousness is merely one of the many planes of the manifestation of the quality. And now, let us proceed to our consideration of the phenomena and principles of manifestation of the inner consciousness. Lesson 3. The basements of the mind. In the lower planes of the inner consciousness are performed the various forms of mental activity which have to do with the building up, preservation, repairing, etc. of the physical body. Every cell has its share of mind, and every combination of cells into cell groups and organs of the body has its group or organ mind also. That which we call instinct or nature in a person or animal is a manifestation of mind on some of the lower planes of the inner consciousness. And these lower planes are susceptible to suggestions or orders from other planes of mind, and will take on suggested ideas or conceptions, the result being that we are often made sick by ideas absorbed or suggested in this way, and we are likewise cured of physical ailments by similar methods. The suggested idea be placed on the proper plane by means of autosuggestion, imparted ideas, and mental treatments of various kinds. Mind pervades every part of the physical body, and is always capable of being impressed by orders or suggestions coming from the more dominant portions of the mind of the individual. On some of the lower planes of the inner consciousness are to be found the seat and abode of the so-called automatic or habit actions of the mind. The habit mind is made up of various things which have been placed there by the individual, which things were once performed in the field of consciousness, but which gradually became almost automatic by reason of experience, repetition, etc., until the performance of them passes from the field of consciousness down to some of the lower planes of the inner consciousness, thus becoming second nature, and being likely to be repeated with little or no attention being bestowed by the conscious mind. You are familiar with this fact. All of you perform certain work almost automatically. You run the sewing machine, typewriter, or play the piano almost automatically, and may be thinking of other things at the same moment. These tasks were originally performed only by an expenditure of much attention and effort on your part, but constant practice has enabled you to delegate the work to certain planes of your inner consciousness, until now they almost work themselves, with a minimum of attention and then concentration on your part. Some writers hold that no one really learns how to perform a task properly until he or she is able to pass it down to this part of the mind, where it is performed almost automatically. Musicians and others are aware that their best work is performed by this part of their mentality, and that when, as occasionally happens, their conscious attention is directed to the work, there is a slip-up and less perfect performance. The artist knows what it is to lose himself in his work, and his greatest successes come at such times. Every writer knows this also, and the phenomena occurs in all manner and kinds of work. How many of us lose ourselves in daydreams when performing our habitual tasks? How many of us seem to stand aside and watch ourselves work at tasks rendered familiar by habit? We often cross the streets without paying conscious attention to our actions, and many of us have had the experience of forgetting where we are going. and after a time, finding ourselves brought up standing in front of the place from which we started. We put on our clothes in this way, the same arm going into the same sleeve, etc., without our thinking about the matter. If you will notice which arm you place in your coat the next time you dress, and then after taking off the coat again, try to insert the other arm first, reversing the regular order. You will be surprised to see how awkward you are, and how the habit mind rebels at the change. The same is true of buttoning a collar. You always button on a certain tab first, and will find it most difficult to reverse the process. We are in the habit of thinking of these things being done by themselves, or as doing themselves, but a moment's consideration will show you that nothing can manifest such activity except by means of mind of some kind and degree. The activity is the result of mental processes and direction, and without mind could not be performed. We may call it automatic or mechanical, if we please, but it is really the result of mind. There is mind back and in every automatic action of the individual. But being below the field of the outer consciousness, we do not recognize the mental operation. It is part of the phenomena of the lower planes of the inner consciousness. And there are other planes of that wonderful region in which certain habits are implanted, but which were not placed there by ourselves. We allude to the field of hereditary influences which have come down to us from those who lived before us throughout countless generations. There are planes of the inner consciousness filled with impressions, ideas, habit, emotions, feelings, desires, and impulses which we have acquired by inheritance from the past. From the time of the cavemen, and even further back, have come to us certain mental seeds and forces which lie slumbering in the deep recesses of the lower planes of the inner consciousness. We are able to control and subdue, or else use these latent impulses by means of our higher mental faculties, but they are there just the same. As some writers have said, we have the whole menagerie within us: the tiger, the ape, the peacock, the donkey, the hyena, the goat, the sheep, the lion, and all the rest of the collection. We have come by these things honestly, and there is no reason to be ashamed of them. The shame consists only in turning these wild beasts loose into actions unworthy of our higher state gained through arduous evolution. As Luther Burbank has said, heredity means much, but what is heredity? Not some hideous ancestral specter, forever crossing the path of a human being. Heredity is simply the sum of all the effects of all the environments of all past generations on the responsive, ever-moving life forces. And all of the effects of all the past environments of all past generations are registered faintly or strongly on certain planes of our inner consciousness. An understanding of this fact will enable us to submit such tendencies when they occasionally poke their heads out from their dark caves in response to some familiar call which has roused them from their slumber, and an understanding will enable us to call upon the past within us for help and aid when we need the same to perform certain of the work of life. We have many things within us which can and will manifest in outer consciousness when so called forth. We may use these things, or else allow them to use us, according to our degree of understanding and willpower. But let us remind you always that there is nothing good enough to allow it to use you. Use many things, but allow nothing to use you. There are other planes of the inner consciousness in which rest the many suggestions placed there by your outer consciousness or that of others. You have a queer storehouse of acquired suggestion, some good, some bad, and some neither or both. And from this storehouse comes the habit thought, of which such a large part of our mental processes are composed. In that storehouse are packed away countless impressions, ideas, opinions, prejudices, notions, likes and dislikes, and similar mental furniture. Much of this has been placed there by ourselves as the result of past thinking or half-thinking, and much has been placed there by the opinions, statements, and suggestions of others, which we have admitted to our inner consciousness without due consideration and examination. As we shall see later on, this storehouse is an important part of our mental dwelling, and we should be careful just what we admit there. We shall also see that by means of autosuggestion, we may place there just what is likely to aid and help us in our lives, and that by the same means we may counteract the effect of many adverse and hurtful suggestions and mental habits that we have allowed to find a home and storage room on these important planes of our minds. An understanding of these facts will be of the greatest importance and benefit to us. On other planes of the inner consciousness are to be found the impressions and records comprising that which we know as memory. The memory part of our mentality is like a vast collection of phonographic records upon which are registered the countless impressions that we have received during our life. Some of these records bear deep, clear, and distinct impressions, which when placed in the recollecting machine, send forth a clear reproduction of the original which produced the impression. Others contain impressions less clear. Some bear very indistinct impressions, which are most difficult of reproduction. But there is this difference between these memory records and those of the phonograph. The phonographic records grow fainter and less perfect according to the frequency of their use, while the memory records register a still deeper and clear impression the oftener they are reproduced. If one dwells in memory upon certain past events, he will find that each reproduction gives out a clearer response. Of course, it is likewise true that one may mix outside facts and imaginary events with the real recollections, in some cases, so that in future reproductions the real and the false appear together. But this is merely another proof of the rule. One may, and many often do, add to a tale at each telling, until at last the retold tale bears but little resemblance to the original. In so doing, one mixes the new impressions with the old on his mental phonographic records, and at the next reproduction, both the original and the added points sound forth together. This is why some people tell a lie so often that they actually believe it. The repeated impressions upon the tablets of memory become deeper and clearer, and the notes of the false mix with those of the true. One should always endeavor to keep an honest collection of memory records and be careful to avoid adding false impressions to the original ones. It is astonishing that anyone at all familiar with the phenomena of memory should doubt for a moment the existence of planes of consciousness beneath that of the ordinary outer consciousness. Every moment of our everyday life, we are drawing upon these inner conscious planes of memory for the many things stored away there, far below the everyday outer consciousness. Not only do we draw upon these planes in this way, but in moments of intense stress, sudden danger, and other critical periods of life, these gates between these planes swing ajar and a flood of recollection pours out from them. It is related in numbers of instances that as a writer well expresses it. The acts of a whole lifetime, which are of consequence, and many that are not, will be flashed across the screen of memory with such lightning rapidity and with such distinctness as to seem like a vast panorama whose every detail is grasped by the mind in an instant of time. A noted high bridge jumper, in describing his feelings while making his famous leap from the Brooklyn Bridge, stated that it seemed as if, during the few seconds required for his descent to the water beneath, there passed through his memory all the acts of his life, in their proper order, some of which had not appeared in his recollection for years, and which would have all his life remained dormant, except for some extraordinary stimulus such as this. It is the almost universal experience of drowning persons who have been rescued at the last moment and resuscitated, that during the few moments just preceding the loss of consciousness, the memory suddenly grasps with a marvelous vigor the deeds of the life which seems about to end, and by some mysterious compelling intuition, the sufferer is able and obliged to recognize at the same time and more fully than ever before the right or wrong of each particular act. The following quotations will show you at a glance what an important part is played by this inner conscious faculty of memory in the domain of knowledge, in the opinion of eminent authorities. All knowledge is but remembrance. Bacon. That which constitutes recollection or an act of memory is the present image which a past sensation has left in us, an image which seems to us the sensation itself. Taine. Memory is a primary and fundamental faculty without which none other can work, the cement, the bitumen, the matrix in which the other faculties are embedded. Without it, all life and thought were an unrelated succession. Emerson. There is no faculty of the mind which can bring its energy into effect unless the memory be stored with ideas for it to look upon. Burke. Every organ, indeed, every area and every element of the nervous system has its own memory. Ladd. Memory is the golden thread linking all the mental gifts and excellences together. Hood. Memory is the cabinet of imagination, the treasury of reason, the registry of conscience, and the council chamber of thought. Basile. A man's real possession is his memory. In nothing else is he rich. In nothing else is he poor. Alexander Smith. I would rather have a perfect recollection of all that have thought and felt in a day or a week of high activity than read all the books that have been published in a century. Emerson. And, after reading the above, remember that all of the records of memory are stored away on the planes of the inner consciousness, the existence of which has been denied by the majority of people until very recently. In considering the marvelous phenomena of memory, what thinking man can doubt that his mind and self are greater by far than the little, narrow field of outer consciousness, which is nothing by the eyepiece of his mental maw, telescope or microscope, before which pass in review the objects rising from, or superimposed by, the planes of the inner consciousness. Lesson 4. The Mental Storehouse. In the previous lessons, we have stated that there are planes of the inner consciousness which resemble vast mental storehouses in which are placed the materials from which much of our thinking is composed. These thought materials are brought by the porters and carriers of our mental warehouse into the field of consciousness, or thought factory, where they are manufactured into the fabric of conscious thought and action. In those vast mental warehouses are much that we never place there ourselves, the remnants of mental goods stored by countless ancestors, which are constantly being brought forward to be woven into the fabric of our thoughts. But there are also vast quantities of material, good, bad, and indifferent, placed there by ourselves, and it is these personal contributions to the storehouse which largely determine that thoughts and acts which result from what we call our character, or our nature. And this being the fact, is it not of the greatest importance that we should be careful just what kind of material we place in these great mental warehouses and storage chambers? Our present thoughts and actions, our characters, in fact, are largely the result of our past thoughts and mental attitude. And the thoughts, actions, and character of each of you in the future will be largely the result of the mental material which you are now placing in these storage rooms of your mind. This is not preaching or moralizing, but is merely the calling of your attention to facts and truths known to and admitted by all students of psychology. We are today largely the result of what we have thought or what we have allowed to impress us in the past. Our mental attitude, together with the kind of suggestions that we have allowed to impress us in the past, determines to a great extent our character and self of today. When we think, we do not manufacture the thought fabric out of the thin air or sunlight, or out of nothing, as many seem to suppose. Each bit of wonderful fabric of thought and action is the result of the weaving of the mental material that we have accumulated in the past and stored away in some of the storage rooms of the inner consciousness. This surely is plain enough to everyone who will give the matter a moment's thought, and yet how few really have realized the truth, and still fewer are those who have learned to act upon this principle. If we were building a house, store, or any other building, how careful we would be to see that none but the best materials were delivered to the builders in whose hands the erection of the property was placed. How carefully each item of material would be inspected. If we were in the manufacturing business and wished to turn out goods of fine quality, how careful we would be regarding the grade of the material to be used. Our buyer would exercise his skill, and the inspector would look over each consignment as it arrived, rejecting all imperfect and unsatisfactory material. And yet, how careless we are regarding our thoughts, moods, mental attitudes, and autosuggestions that we place among the material to be used in our mental building and manufacturing in the days to come. Is it not time to call a halt on these careless and almost criminal methods and adopt a sane, scientific plane of thought life? The mental attitude of a man is represented by the character of thoughts which he allows to take a hold on him. If he allows every despondent, negative, hurtful thought to obtain lodgment in his mind, his mental attitude will gradually become in harmony with such thoughts, and he will be laying away a fresh stock of negative thoughts each day, which will surely be woven into the mental fabric he turns out on some future day. Can you doubt this when you know of the effects of certain mental habits of manifestation? And what are these habits but the using of the thought material of the past? How much harder is it for a man whose mind is full of these negative thought materials to present a bold, confident, courageous front in the battles of life? His every instinct and habit of thought is against it. It is so much easier to droop the shoulders and fold the hands and say, "What's the use?" in such a case, because all the mental material is of that dark gray, negative hue. All the material is of that rotten, worthless quality. But if, in the past, you have cultivated the habit of refusing to admit the negative thoughts and suggestions, have thrown them out on the scrap pile, and have stored away nothing but the bright, cheerful, courageous, and positive thoughts and suggestions, then when you begin to build or weave, you will surely produce the best kind of thought and action. You cannot help it, for you are working with the best materials and with your mental machine adjusted to the proper gauge. All this is far more than jollying or cheering up talk. It is a statement of psychological fact, which, if once thoroughly understood by the masses of people, would make this old world of ours over into a much brighter and cheerful place. An understanding of these principles will make you over mentally, if you will but act upon your new knowledge. There is no secret process connected with this work. All that is necessary for you to do is to will that henceforth you will allow no negative, depressing, or undesirable thought take lodgment in your mind, but will, on the contrary, keep steadily at work, replacing the undesirable things in your mind with desirable material. When a negative thought comes into your field of consciousness, dismiss it with the thought, "There is another bit of that mental truck that'll store it away with it to the scrap pile," and lose no opportunity of thinking the bright, optimistic, positive, desirable thoughts and storing them away. And when you can put one of these thoughts into action, by all means do so, for by so doing you have added a large share to the right kind of material in your mental storehouse. Do not let the thought of the past thought foolishness worry you or discourage you. Think of the comparison made by a well-known writer who compared the mind to a bowl of muddy water into which a clear stream of fresh water was pouring. Anyone will see that the fresh water will gradually clear the entire body of water until the muddy substances are not discernible. So pour in the kind of thoughts you desire, and thus render clear the muddiness that has been your bane for so long. Another writer has compared the matter to a dark room. If you wish to drive away the darkness, just open the shutters and admit the light, and lo, the darkness has disappeared. And this last illustration is true according to the old occult teachings, which held that a positive thought always tended to neutralize and transmute a negative one. In fact, that a positive thought had sufficient potency and force to neutralize many negative thoughts. This being the case, by willpower and perseverance, you may change the nature of your mental materials stored away in the storerooms of the inner 21 consciousness, including the inherited ones, and thus render yourself practically a new person in character and nature within a reasonable time. The ego is the real master, and not the slave of environment that so many seem to think it is. It is true that when the ego lies dormant and passive, the personality is indeed made up of the inherited ideas and feelings, the suggested thoughts and ideas, and the acquired ideas and tendencies picked up during our life. But let the ego once rouse itself and put into operation its own weapon, the will, then it is enabled to master environment and to cast out the rubbish stored away from the past, replacing it with bright, fresh, good, strong mental material from which the thoughts and actions of the future will be manufactured. The ego can remake one's character, for it is the master of the mental warehouse. Dismiss your careless and incompetent mental assistants, which have allowed this accumulation of mental rubbish. Take charge yourself, you the ego, and assert your mastery. Inspect and pick out your own mental material, that nothing but the best quality of thought and action may be produced. Lesson 5. Making over oneself. One of the most interesting phases of the science of using the inner consciousness is that which may be called making over oneself. That is, the application of psychological laws in the direction of rebuilding certain of the inner conscious planes, or rather in replacing the mental material stored there by the more desirable material. This process has been aptly called character building, which indeed it is, for the character is largely dependent upon what is contained in the inner consciousness, and whatever affects the latter affects the character. The word character itself is derived from a Greek word meaning to engrave, to cut in, and some of the authorities state that the Greek word was derived from some older language and was first used by the ancient makers of bricks to indicate the personal trademark marked by each upon the bricks manufactured by himself, each maker having his own trademark. And the word has gradually grown in meaning until today we use it in the sense of the peculiar quality or sum of qualities by which a person or thing is distinguished from others. Webster. This latter-day use of the term is interesting when one is able to trace it from its original usage, showing the idea that was in the minds of those who have gone before us, i.e., that this thing that we call character was something impressed or engraved upon a man's mental substance. To the majority of persons, character is something that belongs to a person by some unchangeable natural law and which cannot be altered or improved. To the experienced psychologist, however, character is a plastic thing, which is modified by the character of one's thoughts and mental attitude, and which may therefore be improved, changed, or altered at will. Psychology, taking cognizance of the planes of inner consciousness and understanding the truth of the fact that character is the fabric manufactured from the material stored away on those planes, now teaches that by placing the proper materials in the storage rooms, we may cause the character to be manufactured in accordance with the quality thereof. In short, that one may practically make over oneself by placing the right kind of raw material in the mind. This is true in the case of training children and others, but is equally true in self-training or character building. To those who may think that in speaking of the planes of the inner consciousness, we are postulating a shadowy, intangible mind, independent of the brain, we would say that this is not correct. We regard the brain as the organ of the mind in its inner conscious manifestations as well as in its outer conscious ones. The brain is composed of an enormous number of cells, composed of plasm, or elementary living matter, some authorities estimating the number of the brain cells at about 500,000 to 200,000, the number depending upon the mental activity of the person. Beside the number of brain cells in active use, there are always great reserve forces of cells awaiting a sudden call. In addition to this, it is believed that the brain will grow additional cells in cases of need, so that the mind capacity of the individual is almost limitless. A class of brain cells actively used will manifest a tendency to spring into activity almost automatically at the slightest need, while those remaining unused will become almost atrophied and are called into action slowly and clumsily. It therefore follows that the cells which are constantly used will exert a more marked influence upon the character of speech. On the other hand, sit all day in a moping posture, sigh, and reply to everything with a dismal voice, and your melancholy lingers. There is no more valuable precept in moral education than this, as all of us who have experienced it know. If we wish to conquer undesirable emotional tendencies in ourselves, we must assiduously, and in the first instance cold-bloodedly, go through the outward movements of those contrary dispositions which we wish to cultivate. Smooth the brow, brighten the eye, contract the dorsal rather than the ventral aspect of the frame, and speak in a major key, pass the genial compliment, and your heart must indeed be frigid if it does not gradually thaw. To sum up the matter of making over oneself, we may say that the whole secret consists in filling up the particular storage room having to do with the desired faculty, and its opposite, with thoughts, actions, desires, manifestations, etc., of the desired thing. Think of the thing, act it out so far as possible, Desire it ardently. Picture it out to yourself as much as possible. In short, keep its mental image before you as clearly and as persistently as possible. It is an old occult maxim that we grow to be like the thing that we keep constantly in our mind. And if you will but keep that axiom in your mind, you will work out the problem for yourself. The secret underlying much of the phenomena called occult is the creation of what is known as a mental image, and which is really a mental pattern or mold from which we wish to materialize character in ourself or others. This mental pattern or mold serves as a model around which is built the actual mental manifestation. And the clearer and stronger we build this mental image, the better and stronger results do we materialize. Keep in mind constantly the idea of the thing you wish to be, and you will unconsciously grow toward being just that thing. This is a well-established psychological law, and is not a mere airy fancy of some writer's imagination. You can see it evidenced in the life of yourself and those around you. Everyone unconsciously inclines toward the shape and form of the mental image that they carry around with them. And, this being so, that we grow to resemble our ideals, should we not be careful to use the right kind of mental patterns or molds? Our manifested character depends upon the mental patterns created by ourselves, either by our own will and according to our own judgment, or else, unconsciously, from the suggestions or will of others. Aristotle wrote that of every object of thought there must be in the mind some form, phantasm, or species, that things sensible are perceived and remembered by means of sensible phantasms, and things intelligible by intelligible phantasms, and that these phantasms have the form of the object without the matter, as the impression of a seal upon wax has the form of a seal without its matter. The student of modern psychology may see, at a glance, just what Aristotle meant, the mental image which molded or served as a pattern for the thought which would spring from the inner consciousness. Kay says, "It is as serving to guide and direct our various activities that mental images derive their chief value and importance. In anything that we purpose or intend to do, we must first of all have an idea or image of it in the mind, and the more clear and correct the image, the more accurately and efficiently will the purpose be carried out. We cannot exert an act of volition without having in mind an idea or image of what we will to effect." The same writer also says, "Clearness and accuracy of image is only to be obtained by repeatedly having it in mind or by repeated action of the faculty. Each repeated act of any of the faculties renders the mental images of it more clear and accurate than the preceding, and in proportion to the clearness and accuracy of the image will the act itself be performed easily, readily, skillfully." And, now, all this that we have said on the subject means simply that you can make over yourself to be that which you desire to be by means of determined and persistent desire and will. By filling up the storage rooms of the proper plane of the inner consciousness with the ideals and ideas which you desire to materialize in your own character and self, you will find that you will gradually begin to grow like the mental image that you have placed there. Your thoughts, actions, feelings, and emotions will gradually be found to be reshaping themselves to fit into the pattern or mold which you have set before them. The material which has been placed in the storage rooms will be brought forth by the silent mental workers, and being placed into the mental machinery will be manufactured into thoughts, moods, feelings, emotions, actions, and outward manifestations of the grade 26 and quality indicated by the materials which you have supplied. You cannot make silk from cotton, nor broadcloth from shoddy. Unless you furnish the proper materials, you cannot expect the finished product to be as you desire. You are making character and self every day, but it depends upon the material furnished, just what that character or self shall be. An understanding of the inner conscious workings of the mind gives you the only key to the mystery of character and self. Then why not act upon it?
In conclusion, the inner consciousness is a powerful guide to unlocking the hidden potential within each of us. Through the practice of autosuggestion, mental mastery, and intuition, we can tap into the vast resources of our subconscious mind and use them to create a life of success, happiness, and fulfillment. If you enjoyed this summary and found it insightful, Don't forget to like this video to help others find it too. Make sure to leave a comment and share how you plan to tap into your own inner consciousness. And if you have